This is Lou Katzos. I'm the president of EMBCA, the East Mediterranean Business and Cultural Alliance. Tonight we're at the Russian Tea Room. We're having our very famous development, design, and construction panel discussion. It's part of a series that we've had over the last 8 years or so. And it's very popular within the industry professionals, whether they're developers, whether they're contractors, major contractors, or designers, architects, engineers, and things of that nature. Tonight is a special evening. It's a little bit of a different event that we're having, although we're going to cover the same types of topics, which is what's happening now in the industry, in particular the major project industry. Tonight we're going to have this event in the honor and memory of Costas Kondylis, who's a very well-known architect to the community, to our community, the major development, design, and construction community. Costa designed about 90 buildings or so. He's probably the foremost and most prolific architect in terms of high-rise buildings in the city. He transformed the skyline of New York City. He died about 3 months ago. We didn't want to have the event until after the family had the memorial for him, which was last month. So we're having our event in his honor. We're going to discuss some of his projects. And we'll then go into our typical topics that we discuss in the panel series. The panel is made up of leaders in the industry and also people that happen to have known Costas when he was alive and have worked with him. For example, I've known Costas, or I knew Costas for over 37 years, 38 years, and we did major work together over that period of time. We have the CEO and chairman of Red Apple, that's John Katzimatidis, who's on the panel. We have Brian Ahern, who's an architect, and he's the director of architecture for the Beechwood organization. And he also worked in Costas Kondylis' office a few years ago. We have Jay Badami, who's the president and COO of Tishman Construction ACOM. We have Akis Kliamanthianos, who's working with Hill & West. He's their chief designer. And he also mentored, Costas was his mentor when he was younger. And we have also Donna Olshan, who's one of the foremost realty person as it relates to luxury condominiums. And she's the author of the Olshan Luxury Report that comes out every Monday. You're going to enjoy, I believe, this event. We haven't started yet. The people are just now starting to come in. And we will touch base a little bit later. Thank you. We actually decided to have this event in the honor and memory of Costas Kondylis, who was one of the most foremost architects in the city of New York, designed over 90 buildings, and really recreated the skyline. This is not a memorial, so we are going to discuss him because many of us, certainly people on the panel, knew him personally and have worked with him. So we're going to discuss him a little bit, then we'll have our typical discussion on what's happening now in the industry. But one thing that makes this a pretty good event is the fact that it's unscripted. So that's what you're going to get tonight, an unscripted event. Let me discuss a little bit about my personal relationship with Costas, who I knew for many years. I met him actually in must have been 1982. That's how far back it goes, when he was working for Philip Birnbaum, who at that time was one of the most foremost architects as it relates to what they used to call, and they still call in some circles, the developer's architect. And what was interesting about Philip is I remember meeting with him a few times because we were looking for architects to design buildings. And I would go to Philip's office and I'd say to Philip, we have a property and we'd like to perhaps use you as an architect. He'd say, where's the property located? So you gave him the location. He said, what is the approximate size of that property? You gave him the approximate size. How big is the building? And Philip used to wear one of those aprons. In the old days, architects used to wear aprons. And Philip would go into a bin and he would say, how big is the building? This big, etc. Philip would just roll out the thing. He says, well, here's a plan that's exactly like that. So Philip was a very well-known architect of his period. Obviously, he was a designer of many buildings. Costas, when he first came into the country, he came as a student, graduated from Columbia University. He already had his master's from Geneva, but he went to Columbia, got his master's again in architecture, and then worked for Davis Brody. At that time, Bond was not a member of the organization. And then he went to work with Philip Birnbaum. I think it was about 1989, I guess. He formed his own company, Costas Kondylis and Partners. And the rest is basically history. He was a very interesting individual. When I first met him, again, this goes back 37 years ago. At the time, I was a vice president at Morse Diesel, which at that time was I guess it was a Harvard at that time of the construction management community. And Costas at that time was very different in that he had that, how should I put it? He had that touch. And he was a great architect. We worked together on a building at NYU in the early 80s. Like I said, about 1982 it was a graduate business dormitory. It was about 26 stories. And then over the years, I worked with Costas on different projects. I think the last one we did with Costas was the Atelier for the Moynihan Group. And then he had started, he was actually they were the architectural firms that had started what became 605 West 42nd Street. And that was around the early 2000s. We went into the hole, and then 2008 hit, and the project stopped. By the time the project stopped, Costas Kondylis, I guess, had dissolved that organization, and a new organization formed out of that with members that used to be in partnership, I think, with Costas at the particular time. So that's my memory of him. My memory of him is that he was a gentleman. He was dapper, handsome gentleman, and he listened. He listened to what you said, and he took his time after he met with a client, listening to the client, what the client wanted, and then a few weeks later, we'd come up with designs. I remember also with my architectural students at Cooper Union, because I was a professor there for about 25 years, I would bring my students to his design studio. And again, there's a lot of people who came out of that particular organization. So what I'd like to do, this is not a memorial. This is just, this event is in honor of him. And what's a better honor than to have professionals discuss the profession? And tonight, if we can, just as a start, for those who have personal memories, who have worked with Costas, just go through them a little bit, and then we start with the normal panel discussion, which happens every 6 months. And what we're trying to find out every 6 months is what's happening in the industry. From developers, usually we have always a major developer on the panel. We're fortunate tonight to have John Katzimatidis, the CEO and chairman of Red Apple Group, representing the development community. We have Jay Badami, who's the president and COO of Tishman Construction ACOM. We have Brian Ahern, now the chief architect, I guess, of Beechwood, the Beechwood organization. We have Donna, and Donna is one of those special people. She comes out with a report every Monday telling us what's happening in the condo market. In particular, Donna doesn't want to touch anything below $4 million. So Donna's about the high-end luxury market. And of course, we have Alkis, who goes back to the Kondylis organization, I guess. And with Alkis, he's with Hill West, and he's their chief designer. And Hill West is one of the foremost architects at the present day. I don't want to use the term, but I'll use the term anyway. A major developer's architect. And even though it may have some negative connotation with some people, there's nothing more positive, in my opinion, than to be a developer's architect, because at least you know you have projects. The other people, they can imagine the projects that never get built. So if we can, we're going to start with John Katsimatidis. And John, memories of Costa?
I only knew Costa for about 15 or 20 years, but I admired him because I meet a lot of people. And I admired him because he was a creator and he was a visionary. And he would create things and you'd say, that looks good. And not everybody is a creator and a visionary the way Costa was. And we were all proud of him. And we were very, very sad as we saw him grow old and the problem he had. But he'll always be remembered from building 90 beautiful buildings.
John, one of the things that you like to talk about is when you see an architect's building or something, a design that's put together, you want that thing to speak to you, to say, wow. Am I wrong on that?
You're not wrong. There's two kinds of buildings. Buildings built by accountants and buildings built by creators and visionaries. And the way there's a big difference. The buildings built by creators and visionaries, I think I mentioned it last time I was here, you look at it and you say, wow, I want to live there. And those are the kind of buildings I want to create and build. We built one like that on Myrtle and Flatbush, and it's beautiful. I'm proud of it. I didn't pay enough attention to the ones we were building in Coney Island. They're great buildings, but I wanted a little bit better.
That may have something to do with the accountants in the picture, John. That may have something to do with the accountants in the business. But John, you know that people told you couldn't build that building and you shouldn't build that building. And they also know what your reaction was.
The accountant said to me, don't build it, we're going to lose money. And you go to Coney Island on a Saturday or a Sunday, and the sun is shining, you stand on the boardwalk, you look at the ocean, and you say, wow, I'm glad I'm alive. Now, I live in the Hamptons. I have a beach house in the Hamptons. And when I open up those ocean doors and I look out, I say, wow, I'm glad I'm alive. And you breathe in that ocean air. So my vision was that I'm going to build something like that in Coney Island. Twin towers, 425 apartments. There's always going to be 425 apartments of people that want to write a check and move in. And you open up the terrace doors and you look out in the ocean on a sunny day and you say, wow, I am glad to be alive.
Jay, memories of Costas.
So first of all, how many people in the room worked for Costas?
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
I just want to get that out there that he was really the patriarch of residential construction, and at Tishman we did a lot of buildings for him. Too many to name, but one experience that I have, I ran the Jersey office for Tishman, and there was a client that we had. His name was Bore, and they were a developer locally. They owned New Brunswick. They owned a lot of office buildings, and they wanted to build an apartment building, a rental, which became a condo in New Brunswick. And they called us. They said, we're really tired of the New Jersey architects. There's a few here. Can you introduce us to some of your architects in New York? I think David remembers this very well. And we said, all right, we know we're doing work for Trevor Davis. We're still alive. We survived it. I said, we know Slice, we know Clayman, And but there's this guy Costas, maybe you want to meet. So we called Costas and we told him about the job, and we told him where it was, and he didn't know where Jersey was. It's like, what the hell? That's the other side of the river. That's a bad place. So, as everybody knows, he could compel an audience. He could compel the room, and he met with the architect. And the architect, the owner, actually fell in love with Costas and gave him the job. And the rest is history. So that was a personal experience where we introduced him to one of our clients in New Jersey, and he won the day, got the job successful, and personally. He was just a great person, commanded the room, and nothing but love for the man.
And I think the change that happened was, in terms of the, quote, developer's architect, Costa brought design into that developer's architect area. Whereas before, they were cookie cutter type buildings, and then Costa came into the picture and really changed how developers' architects actually started to look at buildings. And typically what made a developer's architect really a great architect is they were always great architects in terms of layouts on interiors. Where they were lacking in the beginning, before Costa came into the scene, was really at the exterior end. In other words, they didn't have that design aspect on the exterior, but in terms of interior designs, no one could beat those architects, because the Starchitects and all the rest of them had no clue about any residential layouts. Brian.
Both John and Jay have spoken about Costas, about how he was such a talented architect and a professional, and how seriously he took his profession. But what most people don't know is what he was like as outside of the office. And I worked for Costas for 10 years and a number of projects. But the past 15 years, while he was ill, I spent a lot of time with him. And he would invite my wife and I out to his house in the Hamptons. And I think it's particularly because he liked my wife's guacamole. He made sure that she wasn't. But there was one weekend, there was one morning that he and I were both up early, and he said, "Hey, let's go for a drive." And so I got my car keys. He goes, "No, I'm going to drive." Costas shouldn't have been driving at this point because his disease was taking its toll. But he was my friend, my boss. I trusted him, and I said, "Okay." And we got into his purple 1973 Lamborghini. And he said, "Okay, we're going to go for it." He goes, "I want to show you an old potato barn that I want to convert into a house, similar to the one that I currently have out in Southampton." I said, "Okay." And so we're driving for about, 2 miles and somewhere in Southampton. And he stops in the middle of the road, and he takes the car over the curb. A 1973 Lamborghini in mint condition, over the curb, and we are driving through a cornfield. Stalks of corn this high, whistling past me from side to side, and I could not see anything in front of me. And for a moment I was slightly petrified what I gotten myself into. And Costas just kind of looked over at me, and he smiled and he winked at me. And I just kind of relaxed, and I said, "All right, I'm in your hands. I trust you. I love you. You're a great friend of mine." And it was a very surreal experience, but one that I will never ever forget, and one that I'm very grateful for having. And I could tell you dozens of stories, not so much.
Listen, I'm having a surreal experience because we're talking to an architect now, and I'm expecting some architecture to come out of the conversation. You're talking about cornfields, which is fine, which is not a problem. Let me ask you a question, Brian.
Yes, sir.
What did you learn from Costa as an architect?
Costas never cursed. He never got. He would say, Nick, you know this. He would say, "You guys are bananas," but he was never harsh to us. He treated all his employees well. I think he would take anyone's opinion as to how to make the building better, no matter if you were the lowest man on the totem pole or if you were the highest ranking second in command. He was open-minded to everyone's opinion as to what they thought architecture should be, how to make a project better. and he was just, he was someone who he didn't want the spotlight. He didn't care to take claim, say that was my idea. I came up with that. He just wanted.
No,
to
but I got to tell you, in the end, he would take all the opinions, but in the end, Costa made the decision.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, he always made the decision. I remember going down to his design studio, by the way, where you had all these young people working on computers and all the rest of that. And I remember Costa would come up with designs. He would discuss it with a client, show him everything about it. The client says, "Well, you know what? I don't like that particular thing over there. Oh, okay. Let me think about that." He says, "Oh, this thing here, maybe it should be a little bit, oh, let me think about that." Then he would have his team of architects actually working, coming up with all different types of designs. He was a guy that took the time actually to think out a building, think what the client wanted, and then made the presentation so the client, John, could say, "Wow, that's my particular building."
Actually, that's extremely true, and he's surrounded himself with great people. If you look at the people who came out of his office and are now working in different places, Luigi Russo is head of Slice now. Shamir Shah is an amazing interior designer. I mean, he had such a pool of talent that I think we all got a little bit of the Kondylis magic dusted upon us. And we took it and we ran with it, and now we're all...
Okay, don't drive in a Lamborghini with, okay. Donna, you're...
Let's see.
You're the 4 million plus individual. Tell us a little bit about the high end of the market, and what did you see with architects like Costa versus other people?
Well, Costas was, I would say, maybe one of the founding fathers of the luxury movement in New York.
Yes.
His buildings sold very, very well. They held up, which is another benchmark. How does the building hold up 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 and 20 years later? His buildings have held up really well. And there are certain buildings that he designed that when you go to the top and you see the view, the buyers actually become emotional.
Yes.
The view is so compelling, and how he's laid it out and designed it. And I would say one of them would be 240 Riverside Boulevard. It's, when you get to the top there, it's almost a religious experience for some people. It's so amazing, the view of the river and the park and the foothills of New Jersey. And then on the east side, he did 845 UN. And there, when you get way at the top, the helicopter views and over the UN. I mean, some of his buildings are quite compelling. And to this day, they have held up very, very well in the marketplace.
Well, he was one of the architects who came out with the concept of design adding value.
Right.
Whereas before, when we were talking about developers, architects, people were looking at, as you would say, John, the accountants would be looking at the bottom line of how much they got a square foot and all the rest of it. But Costas' thing was to add value and to, in fact, make the numbers even higher than they would be. And you're absolutely correct. He was always very interested in what is the view. When someone's inside the apartment, not only the layout of the apartment, but when someone's inside the apartment, what are they actually looking at? And that obviously becomes very good.
It's almost as if he had his own personal drone going, the way some of these apartments ended up. You know, that he would know what it was going to look like on that floor. I don't know how he did that or how he could see that, but it's intuitive, some of the things that he did. You have to almost walk through and understand how good it was.
Also, I think it related to his background in terms of the various cultures that he lived in. As we all know, he came from Africa actually. Not too many people knew it, but he spoke Swahili, and went to Europe. So he had that air about him. He had that feel, that touch. When he walked into a room, people looked at him, quite frankly, and when he presented. And when he discussed his vision, they listened. But he also, again, listened to the client. many times, and again, this type of discussion, which is unrehearsed, and I have to say a few things also. Many times, architects, quite frankly, they're not listening to the client. I'm not looking at you, Alcus, on purpose, but many times they're not listening to what the client is trying to tell them. With that, Alcus, and it had nothing to do with you. Tell us a little bit about. For those who don't know, Alcus and I are involved in a few projects, and we're always having fun with each other. But Alcus, certainly you came out of that discipline. You certainly, and you were on a radio program with me actually, discussing architecture in New York while Costa was alive, and we discussed a lot of the buildings that Costa actually designed. Tell us a little bit about your linkage with him. In particular, I love the story where you thought you made a mistake and he was going to yell at you.
So I'll start out all of the testimonies that you hear here. Prolific architect, an amazing person, personable. To his employees, at least, he was never aloof. He was never demeaning. He was always a very welcoming character. The particular story you're describing shows his kind of personable side, where I had done something wrong, and he called me into the office, and I thought this was it. I thought game over, and it was my first. I think it was the first 6 months of me being at the office. So we sat down. He talked to me a little bit about the project, the mistake that I had done, and I thought it was over. I got up, and he said, one more thing, I'm not finished. So I sat down again. I kind of sunk into the chair, and he said to me, "Where can I get a good gyro in Astoria?" He knew that I was living in Astoria, and that just shows how apt and how skillful he was at disarming or diffusing, some very tenuous situations, even with his employees. But he commanded the room. He was a visionary. At the same, he was talking to you about the theory of space, and at the same time, he could be talking to you about the technical aspects of putting the material together, and then he could turn around finishing by talking to you about the copper prices fluctuating and how that affects construction. So his breadth of knowledge was astounding to me. The other thing that was astounding to me, and I always looked up to, was that he was an optimist. Whatever happened, he was even-keeled. He's exactly what you were looking for as a leader. Didn't flinch. He walked into the room. He commanded the room. He didn't need to speak much. He had that kind of a presence. And when he spoke, it was the Bible. You knew that he was correct. He had kind of mulled over all the situations, took up all the opinions, and came out to the right decision. He was great at reading the room. He was great at understanding what the client wanted. And to your point, he knew how to take $1 and make it look like 10, right?
Well, that's certainly correct. And in terms of the optimism, and when you received a call from Costa, when he called you, many times he would call me and he would say, "Lou, we've got to get together. We've got to discuss a project." He would always call me and ask questions about pricing and all the rest of that. He would call me on some bizarre things. He would say, "Come to the office," and then he would show me these wild projects, by the way, and I would say to him, like, why are you looking at this? I mean, this is not going to happen. He said, no, this is going to happen, and he had really fantastic schemes. He never gave up, by the way. He always continued to design, always continued to try to make something better. Optimism in terms of, like me, I'm looking at, do these people have money to do the job? But he was optimistic. Again, this is not a memorial to Costa. I did want to, it's not normal to the development, design, and construction panel discussion, but I thought it was very important for us to take a few minutes before this discussion to discuss someone who is a real legend in the industry. I have spoken to a couple of people on the panel, and we are going to do something that relates more to architecture, and in which case we're going to I spoke, for example, to the Council General of Greece and asked them if we can do a presentation of his works and also have a discussion about his works as an architect. And we'll also talk to the Skyscraper Museum to see if they're interested in doing something. I think we have to, many times in our industry, as Jay mentioned earlier, about people dropping, okay? So I looked at him and I said, hey, Jay, we're going to be dropping at some point also. We're the next generation of the people that are dropping. But I think it's extremely important for us not to forget those who came before us. And many times in our industry, we just forget about people who have done some very interesting and exciting things. And I did want to take the opportunity to do this particular panel discussion in his memory and his honor, because he made us all proud, quite frankly, and he helped many of us here in the industry. He expanded the industry, and that's very important. So now we're going to discuss a little bit about the things we normally talk about, and we're going to do it briefly because this was also about Costas. So, John, if we can, you're developing obviously a few projects. One of the exciting projects that you're doing that you mentioned before on Surf Avenue is something that we did discuss, and you mentioned that the accountants really didn't want to be involved in that particular project, but you had a vision of that particular site. In other words, you imagined that site as being something of what it's actually becoming. And by the way, for the audience who doesn't know, Hill West, and Alkis in particular, was involved in the design of that particular job in Coney Island. Tell us a little bit about your thought process, John, and the accumulation of those properties, which is really almost a duplication of what you did on Myrtle Avenue. Because on Myrtle Avenue, you had all these properties, and then you systematically went project by project by project. Tell us a little bit about that thought process.
Well, on Myrtle Avenue, we owned 3 city blocks, and when the recession hit, we were going to do it all in a couple of years, 2008, 2009. And when the recession hit, a lot of people stopped. So it said, instead of building them all at the same time, we're going to build them one at a time. Coney Island, we purchased about 6-7 years ago. And it was, like I said, it was beautiful land, right on the ocean. And it was an opportunity. You don't find ocean land ready to build like that. And I said I want a balcony on almost every apartment. I want floor to ceiling doors that open up into the ocean. And we want people to feel good about living on the ocean. And people would say to us, wow, you're trying to charge too much. You know what I said to them? Go back, work a little harder, get a better job, come back someday.
Alkis, you were involved in that picture. Tell us how you felt as an architect when John kept looking at your design and said, you know, I don't like this. Come back.
I think that, no, but that's part of, I think that's part of the process. I think that John coming back is part of the MO, and the collaboration, it underscores the collaboration between the architect and the visionaries of the visions of the developer. We thought it was an amazing site. We thought that every opportunity of value engineering that existed on the project was an opportunity to make the design better, simpler, but still remain as an icon for the waterfront. So we saw every time John would come back and say, give us his critique, it was an opportunity for us to up the design.
Yeah, also what was happening is the original design was obviously too expensive, as always, Alkis. So one of the things that we were going back and forth on is making the project more cost effective. But what was interesting, John and Alkis, is the project actually came out better through that process of actually controlling the costs. Because then you started to look at every space. It was really a very interesting exercise that was taking place back and forth.
Well, architects need parameters, right? I think that.
Yeah, because if we don't give you parameters, you go wild.
Absolutely. But it becomes if we don't have them, it becomes a graphic exercise, right? It becomes a design in a vacuum. So I think that architects like Costas, the better ones, are able to take the parameters and make something wondrous out of them. Right? No matter how many challenges and obstacles they might find within the design aspect of the project.
John, tell us your thoughts in terms of St. Petersburg. And again, that's pretty exciting project that you're going to undertake. Tell us a little bit about that thought process, because that's also an amazing scenario.
Well, St. Petersburg, I was in Florida 34 years ago. We bought Pantry Pride supermarkets from Ron Perlman, who bought Revlon. And Perlman had to close with us first because he needed our money to buy Revlon. And Chemical Bank in those days, they were lending him. Mike Milken came up with $1.4 billion. The price was going up $100 million a day, or every other day. $100 million used to be a lot of money. And it's not a lot of money anymore. And Chemical Bank was lending him $500 million, last in, first out. But first, he had to close with me and give him the initial equity to buy Pantry Pride, to buy Revlon. So we closed on him, and we bought 47 supermarkets, 40 shopping centers. And Florida in 1984 was the Wild Wild West. It was just the beginning. They had visionaries down there. The people that I dealt with was the Food Fair clan, Lou Stein, Sam Stein, and it was an adventure. And we sold out. We sold out. We made a lot of money on the supermarkets. We made not so much on supermarkets. We made a lot of money in the real estate. And then we were out of Florida for about 15 years, 20 years. And we were going to St. Petersburg because my wife, Margot, her parents lived there. You know, the west coast of Florida is all the Midwesterners. The east coast of Florida is all New Yorkers, Boston, Philadelphia. They go to Palm Beach, Boca Raton. South America goes to Miami. And this opportunity came along. This opportunity came along because partners are arguing. There was 8 partners in this one parcel and one REIT, and they can never get along. They've been suing each other for 10 years. And me, I'm a peacemaker. I sat them all down on the same table. I made peace, and I wrote them a check. No asks about it. Just wrote them a check, and we could build 1,600,000 square feet. Will be the highest tower in St. Pete, Tampa area, and we're going to build a hotel attached to it. We're going to build condos. We have the option of building offices, and I'm having a problem with the accountants in my office.
John, how are you finding the financial situation in terms of interest costs and things of that nature? What do you see in your mind?
Well, I'm very close to Larry Kudlow, and I've been yelling at Larry in Washington about interest costs. With Secretary Mnuchin, I've been yelling at him too. And what happens is, we had our previous Fed chair kept interest rates artificially low. But what happened? It was wonderful. It was wonderful for the real estate industry, the real estate market, condo market, co-op market, whatever. A month ago, Jay Powell, the Fed chair, said, I'm raising rates, and I have only just begun. And holy cow, everything, the stock market takes a tumble, everything takes a tumble. And even Donald Trump, who was an old New York real estate guy, said, hey, you're crazy, better look at it again. Well, the Fed chair 2 days ago was at the Economic Club in New York, and he did a backward face, and he said, instead of saying what he said the previous one, that we have only just begun, he said, well, it looks like we're pretty much there we got inflation and interest rates balanced, and the stock market went up 600 points, which I feel that if you do something stupid at the Fed, they probably will raise another quarter point in December, but I think that'll be the last one. But if they keep raising rates, it's going to be very, very bad for the real estate industry.
Thank you, John. Speaking of Donald Trump, many of you, of course, know that Costas was also mentioned as Donald Trump's architect. He was Trump's architect, and because of that, I also invited him to this event. I did send a letter to Trump. I did send a letter to Trump to come to the event. I did get a response. He's a little bit tied up right now. But as I was penning the letter, and I had to say it. An event at the Russian Tea Room. So so as I was writing it, I said to myself, anybody who would look at this would say, I don't think so. Jay, let's discuss what's happening in the industry in terms of construction costs. I don't know, what do you see? Because a lot of things are happening in the industry. Certainly Tishman is one of the foremost in the nation construction managers. And you obviously, as an organization, had to deal with the union, non-union issue, which you basically have solved because you're doing both an open shop and all the rest of that. Tell us what's happening right now in the marketplace as it relates to construction costs. And another thing, in terms of the quality and the level of the contractors that are around today, because I've been disappointed recently.
There's still work out there. I was talking to a good friend and a client, David Rothstein from Extel, the audience, and we were talking about that the market has really paused in New York, certainly as relates to the condo market. I don't think that's a secret. The company that I represent, we do office buildings. We just won JFK, which was a $7 billion job. So we have to make sure that all our eggs are not just in one basket. We have to be multidisciplined. The other group that reports to me is the Hunt Division, which AECOM purchased a few years ago. We're doing the Rams Stadium. So it's not just residential for us. I know this is a residential panel, but
Yes.
But any company that is really just strictly in one market, certainly on the construction side, will have issues. So I'm seeing a lot of resumes coming to my attention from my competitors who have put all their eggs in the residential market. But someone who does a residential building, does a core and shell, can probably do an office building. The tenants they don't know the difference. I mean, it's not a finish issue. When you do an office building, it's core and shell. Or if you do an airport, it's a baggage system. So it's easy to transcend from one to the other. As far as the market in New York, we have a lot of office building work. So I think that's going to translate into a lot of residential. People have to live somewhere. So we're doing one Vanderbilt. We're looking at a couple other deals in Midtown for similar banking institutions who want to take advantage of the Midtown East rezoning. So that's positive, and certainly Amazon, even though that'll be a long-term development in Long Island City, there's going to be people that have to live somewhere that will eventually come into New York or certainly help Jersey out. But
where do you see the prices going, the construction costs, in your mind? Because I found, by the way, recently, buying projects, we can buy fairly well right now.
you can.
Yeah.
I mean, the foundation contractors are looking for work. We're out to bid on a project now, and we're competing union against non-union for superstructure concrete. The union prices are lower than the non-union prices, which is a shock. We would have never seen that. And I'm talking by 4 or 5%, which is
pretty good. Yeah.
Unusual,
Yeah.
but that is the market. It has gone the other direction, and the union contractors know that they have to be competitive or they're out of business, and the non-union guys are busy. So, and the talent is probably better on the union side, but you're going to overpay, so you have to have a good deal. So my agreement with the unions, and I'm only signatory to Local 79. Of course, we own a non-union company called Leading Builders Group, which is over there, and of course you have to make sure there's proper firewalls or bad shit happens. So if I go to a union contractor and a non-union contractor, I will generally go to the union contractors and say, look, you got to get within striking distance, or I got to go with this way. And Gary LaBarbera understands that. Not a total fan of it, but he understands at the end of the day, if he's not competitive, I have to go to a non-union contractor. The problem is, at the end of the day, I have to sign the contract. So I have to have the comfort when I do a job for John, it says, I'm putting you know what on the line, so I have to make sure that the people at those companies are still going to be here tomorrow. And we know the comfort of the union contractors, the guy's going to be there. But there's limited contractors out there regardless. I mean, curtain wall contractors, there's 2 or 3 that you can go to. Elevators, there's the same 2 or 3, and they're all struggling. They don't have the talent. They steal from each other. Superstructure concrete, you have a few. Electrical contractors, few or far between. Of course, we're doing Hudson Yards, so that, you know, you read about that. So the market right now is strong, but I certainly see a downturn. And cost-wise, if you have a job that you're going to start in 12 months from now, now's a good time to buy it. Foundation contractors are looking for work. Superstructure contractors are looking for work. So the people that are doing residential today, I'll take the JFK Airport, which will be a major project. So
What are you finding out, or what's going on with the tariffs? I know that some major projects that we have bought, for example, have become problematic, and even though you have a contract price that's stated, you know, as being, no matter what happens, that's the contract price. But when you're dealing right now, for example, with Japanese exterior, wall contractors, they have a 10% tariff, and it's going to go up another 15% in January. Have you come across those type of issues in some of the projects you're doing now?
So I'm doing the Ram Stadium, and as steel is coming from China, the roof steel at Ram Stadium. So the owner has to write checks to the U.S. government as the ships are coming across for unloading. So that is today. So the owner is writing $1 million checks as the tonnage is coming across. At the end of the day, it adds cost to what is a $3.5 billion. It's the largest stadium in the country. It's the biggest stadium. It's going to be for the Rams and the Chargers. So that's I oversee that project. So that's where an owner, I don't have that. I don't own that. I didn't buy that because overbuy it, you know, contractors, how do you price it? So it was an exclusion in my GMP. Turner is my joint venture partner there, but that owner is writing the checks to the government. So at the end of the year, if the tariffs stop, then he saves money. But by that time, all the steel would have been shipped from China for that roof.
Are there tariffs now?
Then
Oh, yes,
they're paying,
yes, John.
that owner is writing checks
Yeah.
as the steel is coming across.
Yeah. On the curtain wall, John, it went up 10% on material that's coming in. And in January, it goes up another 15%. That's 25%. Not on all elements, but on some of the elements of the exterior wall. Donna, we heard the word Amazon, and you were on a panel. You were on a panel with us, and you called it here. So tell us about what you called, and what are you seeing now?
So I think this is why Lou brought me back.
That's exactly right. No, that's not the only reason, of
Okay.
course.
So last year, you know, everybody's a little sad, whatever, and faith with talking about retail. And I said that there was going to be a new wave of wealth in New York. And it may not be this year, but it would be soon. And it may supplant Wall Street, and it was the tech sector. And it had started with the visionary real estate developer is Michael Bloomberg. It started in 2010, when he seeded the Cornell Technion campus. And that became the incubator. The first class were 200 people, and there were 30 startups out of it. And at the same time, if you're watching the landscape grow, Columbia and NYU are expanding computer science facilities, and Google is expanding. So all of this was going on, watching this and seeing the type of clients coming through all of the various apartments I show. And it came to me that we were going to be Silicon Valley East. So I said this here last year.
Yes, you did.
Some people think I had an inside deal that I did.
What if you said something that was wrong?
Okay. But anyway, it came true.
Yeah.
And Google will continue to expand. Amazon will expand. There will be a big cybersecurity group in New York. And tech, I do think, ultimately will replace Wall Street as the biggest economic driver. So that means that's good for real estate.
Yeah.
Really good.
Tell us what's happening in the market right now outside
right now.
of that. Yeah.
Okay, right now in luxury. it's a buyer's market. We could see that by the first quarter of 2018. In 2018, the number of contracts at 4 million and above were already 15% below 2017. So we saw it there, but what we can't see in my report is I'm just reporting on contracts signed, velocity, and where things are getting sold. What we can't see is what the prices are because they weren't closed yet. But Jonathan Miller is reporting in the Element report, the last 3 or 4 quarters have been down in closed sales prices. In terms of,
Are you seeing more product? You're seeing the product basically shrinking in the marketplace?
no, there's more and more product. There's too much product, and that's part of the problem. The Midtown corridor is saturated with luxury condos. The data is very clear. The golden years in new development were 13, 14, and 15. And this year, I'm projecting that our numbers at $4 million and above, we're going to probably close 10% fewer deals than we did in 17. 18 is going to be 10% below 17. And why is that? The prices are too high. It's pretty simple. So we had prices that got too high, compounded with a big change in the tax law.
Yes.
And that infected the bloodstream of New York.
Explain that for the audience. Most of the
Okay.
people know it, but explain it.
Okay, so in the end of December of 17, they changed the tax law that you could only deduct state and local taxes, including your real estate taxes. The cap was $10,000. In New York City, our luxury buyers, all have 6 or 7 figures in state and local taxes. Forget the real estate taxes. That's what they have as income. So they no longer have the ability to deduct it. And that really seeped into the bloodstream. And the buyers then started to put the brakes on and evaluate what's their net dollars, where's this all going? And that was the tipping point. And we continue to go down. Now, when I evaluate the data, the 13, 14, 15 data, and I look at new condos, once these luxury developers started to push above the $2,800 and above mark, that's when you also started to see the market go down. There is a threshold where it can go, and it can't go any higher. And people started to put prices on that are too high. And the only way out of that is to adjust the price down. It's the only tool.
I remember David Rothstein was sitting on a panel, and we were talking about actually luxury condominiums, and David was saying to everyone that there's X amount of people that have X amount of money, and X amount of people who have X amount of money, and at some point, there's not enough people out there, basically, that will go there and buy the product at the amount of money that we're talking about. Brian, tell us a little bit about your organization and how you see the marketplace, because your market right now is a little bit different.
Yeah, that's correct. I've 25 years I was working for Costas or various architects and developers, designing high-rise buildings in Manhattan. One day on a train ride into the city, when the train stopped, I took out my phone and did a little math, and I realized that I had spent 1 year, 4 months, and 2 weeks of my life on a Long Island Railroad train car. I said, you know what, that's enough. I live in Long Island. I'm going to try and find something.
There's a lot of action in Long Island.
Yeah, there's a lot of action. And the Beechwood organization is the largest development company of residential homes. They build large residential communities. Some are kind of age restricted, 55 and older. Some are not.
By the way, that age restricted stuff, we were talking about us dropping dead and all the rest of that. However, I will say that as the population gets older, that stuff becomes like very interesting market to get involved in.
It is a very interesting market because there are a lot of people who live on Long Island who have lived there all their lives. Their children are grown, they've left, and they no longer want to be able to have to go out and shovel their driveway and cut their lawns. So they go into these communities where all these amenities are taken care of, and they have swimming pool, and they have, you know, club rooms, and they can play, you know, Texas Hold'em and all this kind of great stuff. So there is an untapped market. Well, I don't want to say an untapped market because I don't think my boss wants everyone to know our secret weapon.
I think those people who are involved in that particular scenario are going to do very well, and they're doing very well
Yes,
right
they are.
now.
Yes, they are. They're doing very well. Taxes for them are very low. Prices for the homes that they're buying are not terribly expensive.
What do you define as that? What's the average home sale?
I would say somewhere between 800,000 to $1.5 million would be on the high end. Depends on. We're doing some stuff out in Southampton. We're doing some stuff out in Westbury, and we're actually starting to dip our toe into apartment buildings. Long Island Nassau County won't allow you to build more than a 80-foot tall tower. So we have a couple of 7-story residential apartment buildings on the boards, and they just completed one 9 months ago, and they are actually getting New York City rents for their. And this is in Westbury. The building is called the Vanderbilt. Wants to write that
Well,
down.
we're seeing a lot of development, design, and construction activities all over, you know, all over the city and in Long Island, as you say, in New Jersey, and the you know, there's only so much people can afford, quite frankly, and people have to go somewhere. And Hill West, actually, if you can, Alkis, just grab the mic a second. You're doing projects in locations that you never would have thought you would be building, the type of buildings that you're building.
We're doing a few projects out in the periphery. So to again underscore all the points here, not everybody makes six figures in salary. The demographic is changing. You get a lot of millennials who can't afford the city anymore. You're getting empty nesters, and they are looking at other locations such as New Rochelle, Yonkers, White Plains, Jersey City, which is a huge hotspot at the moment. So we're getting this kind of urban suburban living. We are looking at some projects in that kind of environment. You know, especially the you know, New Rochelle and Yonkers, all of those areas. I think it's part of their viability to start embracing development. So the land acquisition is low, taxes are low, it's near train stations. So all of that makes it a really good catchment area for people that want to leave the city or have to leave the city, and also be 30 minutes away from the city. So with all the tech stuff that's going to be happening, I think those areas in the periphery are a lot more lucrative, and the profit margins for the developers are a lot higher, right? Yeah. Because the land acquisition is so low.
You had mentioned you know, that you're in Long Island City, Astoria, and the gyro that Costa told you or asked you, where do you get the great gyro? But speaking to Amazon, when that was announced, all of a sudden, you know, there was a downturn in the Long Island City market. All of a sudden, everything took a reversal, yeah. And actually prices are going up. I mean, some of the for example, one of the major projects that you're involved in, which is you know, over 800 condominium units, they actually shut down the sales and actually are raising the prices, you know, by about 15% right now. And that's it. And the building, by the way, is only on the 5th floor, and it's like 67 floors. So I find that extremely interesting. John, we talked about, and Alkis just mentioned it has to do with transportation. One of the and let's discuss a little bit about infrastructure and transportation. One of the issues that you were facing also in Coney Island is the transportation issue, where the project is located. What is the thought process in terms of getting people around from that area?
Well, you have to be, like we said, you have to be creative, innovative. We have beautiful beachfront property, but it's 8 blocks away from the subway. So I have envisioned Coney Island. We're going to have our own trolley, just like the San Francisco trolley, and it's going to go up and down Surf Avenue, and it'll play Coney Island music. and it'll take you to the subway, and it'll take you for a Nathan's Frankfurter. And the other thing we're doing, and we're in the process of doing now, is creating a high-speed ferry to take you to Wall Street and to take you to Midtown Manhattan in 35 minutes. So people that want to live on the ocean and want to be able to wake up on the ocean and breathe that ocean air, you're able to do it. And I think that'll add to our sales. But to say one thing, we're doing it as a rental. We're not looking at it as a condo or whatever. And I think more people are looking towards rentals. The rental market is very successful. And as the interest rates go up, the condo market gets hurt unless you have a special situation like Long Island City.
John, we're going to start to wrap it up. But what do you see going forward in terms of residential construction, number one, in the city, and what is your thought about St. Petersburg?
Well, we're negotiating with the city because we have the ability to build another 3 or 4 buildings besides the Twin Towers we're building now. And we're telling the city we like better zoning, and we have a choice. I could spend the next $300 million I'm going to spend in New York City, and I'm a New Yorker. I love New York. I love Brooklyn. I could spend it in New York, but I have the option. I could spend it in Florida too. And we could spend it in both places.
But are you bullish in terms of what's going on? What do you see?
Florida, I am very bullish on. I think Florida, you're adding 2,000 or 3,000 people a day. Millions of people are moving to Florida because of the tax advantages, because of, and look, I was, like I said, I was a Bill Clinton Democrat. I love Bill Clinton. You know, I give my left arm for Bill Clinton. But the Democratic Party has changed. And I don't know where the socialist group is coming from, who's funding them. I really, really don't know. And Florida was in danger of getting a socialist governor, which did not happen. DeSantis won for governor, and was in danger of losing the Senate seat. And Scott, who is was a terrific governor for 8 years, won that seat. So I think Florida is safe for the next 4 years. But I believe, well, like I said, I was a Bill Clinton Democrat. I'm pro-business. And when I ran for mayor, I ran as a Republican liberal. What does that mean? I'm pro-business, but I want to help the people of the inner city. I want to help the kids in Harlem. I want to help the homeless. But I don't want you to move 1 million people from Central America and obligate us to help them. And that's ridiculous.
Jay, what do you see in the marketplace? Tishman ACOM is in a lot of different markets, obviously. First, tell us what you see in the residential side in New York going forward, and what do you see in other parts of the country?
I think Manhattan relatively flat. I see some hotel construction. Certainly Brooklyn I see the Bronx starting up. There's some residential activity there. I see Brookfield getting very active, both in the Bronx and in Brooklyn. Around the country, I'm optimistic. I think Chicago's got a lot of work on the table. Los Angeles is booming. San Francisco is booming. DC, of course, will boom just by virtue of Amazon being there as headquarters number 2. Florida, certainly we hope to have the privilege of building John's project in St. Petersburg, but southern Florida is very busy. We're doing a lot of work in Tampa, probably have the largest project going in the state. So I'm optimistic around the country, but I just think New York City, because of the tax issues, and I think the mortgage interest, which you didn't mention, is also a killer where you're capped at the amount. So somebody buying a $4 million condo is really limited in their write-off of mortgage interest. So I think that also hurts. So that's a twofer that is hurting the business. And just people aren't gonna buy condos, so as John said, the rental market is probably stronger.
I just want to make one example.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
I want to make one example. My daughter wanted her own apartment about 3 years ago. So she moved to 3rd Avenue, got an 800 square foot apartment, and she rented it, and she was paying $4,000 a month, $4,500. Then all of a sudden, the condo owner says, I'm selling it, get out unless you buy it. And we end up overpaying, we're paying a few $100,000, $1.5 million, $1.6 million, and we financed it. Well, between maintenance, real estate taxes, and the payments to the bank, that's $9,000 a month, where she was paying rent for $4,500. Okay, give me a break. Take your choice. And the days when we were growing up, 10, 20 years ago, you could buy an apartment for $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, and sell it in 5 years for double. So you were justified. Well, guys, that's not going to happen. So you have two types of buyers. The people who are just going to buy because they're in the inheritance business, and the people that have to write a check every month.
$400 a foot, and on their union price, of course, that would be more, but they're moving forward with their 2 projects in the Bronx, and they're going to continue with their projects in Brooklyn. So I see a lot more activity in Brooklyn, and we're doing Atlantic Yards, which is now Pacific Park. It was Greenland, it was Ratner, and now Greenland is selling multiple sites. We're doing work for Dan Brodsky there, and he's looking to take more control. I think TF Cornerstone took one or two of the sites. So the other thing is a lot of the foreign investors are pulling back. Greenland, by example. But they're selling their parcels to other developers.
And China is pulling back all the way.
Well, Greenland was China. So we got that Oceanwide is doing the same. So the foreign investment is also not coming to buy the condos that they were years ago, right? So that work is fine.
Yep.
Brian, what do you see in your end of the business?
I agree a lot with what John was saying. I think it was 2016, and I think I attribute this quote to Leonard Steinberg, who said that the greatest amenity is a lifetime unobstructed view of Central Park. And that might have been true 2 years ago, but I think now the most important amenity that people are searching for is open space. Is to have, you can open your doors. And John, I'm from Long Beach. I'm 6 blocks from the beach as well. There is something really spectacular about being able to breathe in that ocean air and to have open space rather than just being in a small cookie cutter apartment and you're paying a tremendous amount of rent. I think,
So you see growth in the housing that you're involved in?
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big reason why, because people now are getting.
You don't want to spend 3 hours a day on the highway.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely right.
But they get backyards, they get greenery, they get green space, and I think there's a lot to be said for that as an amenity, as opposed to, no offense, but I know that the project that GID was doing, you guys have like 70,000 square feet of amenity space, and it's great to have a climbing wall and 3 swimming pools, and
You got to climb somewhere, man, if you don't have a backyard.
Yeah. But I think John's right. I think outdoor space is going to be the next most important amenity for residents.
Very good. Donna, what do you see in the $4 million market and up?
For the future. Next year?
Yeah,
No,
well, what do you
I'd
see in
say-
the
I
next
would
few
say-
months? What do you see in the next year? Yeah, not beyond that.
I think we're in a period of, I think our market is deteriorating now. We go from stable to deteriorating because we have to shake through a lot of inventory, the tax thing, and if the mortgage rates go up, and also the shrinkage of the foreign market. So this contraction means that prices have to readjust. They have to be repriced. And it's just a question of what the seller wants to do. Do they want to get ahead of the train, or do they want to wait? It's just better to cut and run and get out now. It will go back up, And when it goes back up, it's going to be quite strong and it'll be very compelling. But it's going to take a little while. Listen, real estate's a cyclical business, and we're on a down cycle now. Sorry.
It happens, by the way. Alkis, what do you see in your end? Because architects are, are the ones that see things happening first. Because the building obviously has to be designed before it's constructed. So what are you seeing out there?
I think more of what the panel said. I think that, we see kind of a pause. I think that it'll be a status quo in the sense that you'll see projects in Jamaica, Queens, in the Bronx, in the periphery of Brooklyn, in the peripheries that I mentioned before. It probably won't have a volume that it had for the past 5 or 6 years. I do think I am a little bit more bullish than the rest. I'll be the optimist here in the sense that I do think that the Amazon, this whole tech, will have a push. Yes, we are cyclical, but I think that the tech push will kind of buoy us up from that downturn relatively, hopefully quickly.
I agree with you, Donna, in terms of all these tax issues that are becoming a problem for New Yorkers. But if we can get past that, I can see what Alkis basically is talking about also.
I think the tech. I think he's absolutely right. I think tech will create a strong rebound, and we will come out of it. And I think that I think California, the tech companies have to reevaluate whether they want to develop in California. First of all, New York is where creative meets capital. And we have a lot of it. When Amazon picked New York, a lot of it had to do with the pool of talent here, not just the deal in Long Island City. Right. That talent pool is what they're tapping into. And a lot of the young people, the millennials, are shifting in this direction. Even the West Coast people are shifting in this. And by the way, I really don't know why people continue to invest and build on the St. Andreas Fault. That, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. If you're a betting guy, why wouldn't you develop here in the boroughs? Why are you building on the St. Andreas Fault? I don't know.
You can get oceanfront property in Nevada. The other thing I wanted to bring up, with Amazon, you're going to be hiring a lot of high-priced people that make $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 a year. What are you going to do? Put those people in Kansas City or Boise, Idaho? You put them in New York City, where they have the best choice of restaurants, theater, and having a real life. It's not a life to make $200,000 a year and having to live in Boise, Idaho.
I'd like to thank everyone who has come here today.